Hey guys, it's Chris from Highline Guitars and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. In this episode, I'm going to explain the technique that I use to put an image like this onto the front of a guitar. So stay tuned and we'll get started. The first step in the process is to create a graphic that you can transfer to the guitar body. In this case, I used a collection of vintage science fiction magazine images that I got off the internet and arranged them in Adobe Illustrator. Then I masked it off using the shape of the guitar at 100% of actual size. I suggest using graphics which have a lot of color and a lot of contrast. If there's any white in the image, it doesn't transfer as well. Once I was satisfied with the design, I flipped the art as a mirror image so that it will print out with the correct orientation for transferring onto the front of the guitar body. My desktop printer isn't large enough to print out a guitar body, so I printed it in sections with a 1/2 inch overlap, and then I trimmed everything and taped it up from the back side so I had one complete image. Yeah, I could also take it to a service bureau which does large scale inkjet printouts, but I decided to do this on the cheap and I just printed it myself. The surface of the wood should be sanded smooth with 220 grit sandpaper and then sealed with some flat white paint. This will give you the best contrast after you've applied the graphics. Apply a liberal amount of Mod Podge to the surface. Spread the Mod Podge around the surface with a foam brush. It takes a while for Mod Podge to dry, so you don't have to rush it, but at the same time, you don't want to let it start to set up. Also, you want to try to apply it as smooth as possible. Next, you'll apply Mod Podge to the ink side of the graphics that you've printed out. Apply a liberal amount as you see here. Spread the Mod Podge around the graphic using a foam brush. It's going to wrinkle the paper, and you don't want to work it too much or you'll start to smear the ink. Set the guitar body onto the printed graphic and be very careful. You don't want to move it around too much or the ink could smear. It's possible that the printout might wrinkle due to the moisture in the Mod Podge, but you can reduce that by stacking some heavy books onto the back of the guitar and leaving them there while the Mod Podge dries. You'll want to let it dry for about 24 hours before proceeding to the next step. After the Mod Podge is dried for at least 24 hours, you can begin the process of removing the paper. To do this, you'll apply water over the surface of the paper and let it soak in for a couple of minutes. Then you can use your fingers, rubbing them in a circular motion, to ball up that paper and remove it. The ink should remain because it's dried into the Mod Podge, which is waterproof once it's cured. Most of the image in this example turned out pretty well, but I did have a problem with the graphic in the center of the lower bout, so I decided that I would remove that and replace it with a new one. Here I've cut away and scraped off the graphic that didn't work out the way I wanted it to. I then put some fresh Mod Podge on that area and then applied a new graphic using the same process I used before and allowed it to dry for 24 hours. After waiting 24 hours, I sponged on some water and then removed the excess paper. Since the back and sides of this guitar are going to be white, I thought it would be kind of cool to spray a soft white edge using my airbrush. As you can see at this point, the surface is pretty rough. If I want to smooth it out, which of course I do, I'll need to fill that in, and that's what I'll do in the next step. The best way I've found to smooth the surface is to use Aqua's water-based Woodgrain Filler. I'll just slather this stuff on and build up a pretty thick layer over the top of the printed graphic, and then later on I'll sand it smooth. And this is what the surface looked like after applying that Aqua coat. It's still kind of rough, but it's much better than it was before, and this surface will be very easy to sand smooth with some 150 to 220 grit sandpaper. However, be really careful when you're sanding because you don't want to sand through the Aqua coat and start removing some of your graphic. You probably won't be able to level sand that Aqua coat absolutely smooth, and don't try. What you'll do next though is you'll start applying multiple coats of a water-based polyurethane, spraying coat after coat until you've built it up to a thickness that is easy to begin the final stages of level sanding before you begin buffing it. So that's a technique I use to apply an image graphic to the front of one of my guitars. Now at this point I have applied about 8 coats of a water-based clear gloss polyurethane, and I'm going to let that sit for a couple of days. Then I'm going to go back in and dry sand it level with about 400 grit 3M's 216U sandpaper. Then I'll go back and apply an additional probably 4 to 5 coats of the water-based clear gloss polyurethane. Then I'll let it sit for probably 2 weeks and let it fully cure to its maximum hardness. At that point, I'll go back and start level polish sanding with an 800 grit and then work my way up to about a 1500 grit. And then from there, I'll be ready to take it to the buffing machine and put on a high gloss finish. So that's the gist of how I applied this graphic. I hope you find it inspiring, and maybe we'll give it a try yourself. So until the next episode, take care.